Hey everybody, here to continue our learning of the French Revolution. So in the past we talked about the causes of the French Revolution, how the French Revolution began. We also study the kind of founding document of the French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And today we're going to talk more about kind of the meat of the French Revolution. And so we're going to focus on a couple things. We're going to focus on why did Austria and Prussia declare war on France and invade France, which is really kind of adds to the whole confusion because as the French are kind of tearing themselves apart, having a little civil war with themselves, they also have Austria and Prussia, the countries to the east of them, invading them at the exact same time, which, as you can imagine, would be pretty difficult. Because if you can, think back to our own history, imagine if, two countries invaded the United States when we were fighting our civil war, would have added really to the confusion. We're going to talk about the execution of the King and the Queen of France, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and talk about why they were executed. And then we're going to talk about the first modern mention of terrorism. The word terror gets its origin from the French Revolution, and we are going to real briefly discuss the Reign of Terror. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we are going to talk about, here we go, is Austria and their role in the French Revolution. What we see happening is that Austria is getting kind of nervous that the king and the queen are in danger. And basically, Austria threatens war if the monarchy is harmed. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why would Austria care what happens to the king and the queen? And the answer to that question is Marie Antoinette is the sister of the Emperor of Austria. And so when King Louis and Marie Antoinette gets seized by an angry mob of women, and yes, that is correct. It is sometimes hard to believe certain things happen, but there is a mob of angry women that march to Versailles and slaughter the king's guards, and basically bring the king and the queen back to Paris, essentially as prisoners. Austria has essentially had enough, and they're getting ready to go to war. And so basically, France and Austria are now at war with each other, and that really kind of adds to the whole confusion of that French Revolution. Okay, so anyways, the National Assembly begins to get concerned. Now they're at war with Austria and Prussia. And they're concerned that what happens if Austria and Prussia end up invading France and defeating their armies? Then they will just put the king and the queen essentially back into power. So many people within the National Assembly, which eventually turns into a new governing body called the National Convention, decide is that for the revolution to live, the king and the queen must die. And so they're basically going to move to the idea that the king and the queen need to get killed. All right? But on top of all the inner struggles they're having, they still have to go and fight this war. So they have to build an army, so they start a draft. And they also have to deal with the internal opposition that they're facing within France. And so what the French revolutionaries design is a quick and efficient way to kill people. And we are now introduced to the guillotine, which is a supposedly humane way of chopping off somebody's head. And there was a famous phrase within the French Revolution that stated that freedom can't be secured unless criminals lose their heads. And so we see a lot of people start getting their heads chopped off. And really the most famous of the executions were the executions of Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette. Now it's important to note that only Louis was killed in January 1793. Marie Antoinette was killed sometime later. But basically, the main motivation for Louis being killed is that they were very concerned that what if Austria and Prussia were able to defeat France's army, then they would be right back where they started. So they felt like the revolution would succeed if the king were to be killed. And so Louis was marched up to the guillotine like any common criminal or any other person was. Louis tried to give a speech, but they just put the drum roll on and they kind of just ignored him. And they plopped him down on the guillotine and they chopped off his head. And just like that, the National Convention and all the French revolutionaries were assuming that the revolution was safe. Now, how could they return power to the king if the king indeed was dead? And so after this, we have what is known as the Reign of Terror, when the French Revolution just turns incredibly bloody. And a lot of times what's lost on this is that there was a good chunk of France that was not really supporting the French Revolution. You could almost say it might be 50-50. When people learn that the king was killed, a lot of people are very upset, including a lot of the poor peasants who are part of the Third Estate. They're like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" They loved the king for whatever reason. They liked the idea of having a king, and the execution of a king just appeared to them to have kind of gone too far. So basically, this is the most radical period of time within the French Revolution. It's the period of time between 1793 and 1794. And thousands upon thousands of people are killed. Nobles are killed. Pastors, bishops, priests are killed. Members of the royal family are killed. Members of the Third Estate are killed. People on all different levels of the Third Estate are killed. And eventually what happens is that people soon get kind of just annoyed with the French Revolution or the Reign of Terror and all these killings of people. And so they decide to kill this guy named Maximilian Robespierre, who was really the kind of brainchild of this kind of execution and, kind of the start of the whole Reign of Terror. So it's kind of ironic. The guy who kind of starts this idea of killing the king and the queen and killing all these people during the Reign of Terror, he's really the last one to be killed by the Reign of Terror. But this period of time, like I said, is incredibly bloody. And it's kind of interesting when you think about terrorism, because I think a lot of people today just think of terrorism as being something that's associated with, you know, radical Muslims and Osama bin Laden and stuff like that. But the reality is that terrorism has been around for several hundred years and it's been used by all different kinds of people. And terrorism is basically a political act. Terrorism, I guess the kind of definition of terrorism is to use terror to, gain a political goal. All right, and you basically attack people to instill that fear within them. Okay, so if you look at 9/11, Osama bin Laden and his fellow Al Qaeda terrorists, they didn't attack, I guess the Pentagon could be kind of considered a military target, but the main, you know, kind of thrust of their attack was the Twin Towers. Attacking civilians was kind of their goal. They want to attack civilians to kind of freak people out to achieve what they want. I mean, bin Laden and his fellow terrorist buddies, they weren't just out there just killing for simple pleasure of killing. They wanted to achieve a certain goal. And sometimes terrorism is quite successful. Even if you look at in the past 10 years, the country of Spain was assisting us in the war in Iraq, which started in 2003. And there were bombings in Madrid. Al Qaeda bombed the subway in Madrid, and they basically gave the Spanish citizens an ultimatum that if you continue to assist the United States in Iraq, we will keep on attacking your civilians randomly throughout the country. And it worked. As Spain pulled out of Iraq, they stopped assisting us, and terrorism can be quite successful. Okay, and like I said, terrorism has been used throughout history by lots and lots of different people. In fact, if you were living in the 1980s and someone said the word terrorist, you would think of Irish people. And you're like, what, Irish people? But yeah, in the 1980s, it was the Irish. They were trying to break away from the British, and restaurants were being blown up, civilians were being killed throughout Great Britain. And that seems kind of ridiculous, but it's true. In the early 1990s, you had an American citizen named Timothy McVeigh who brought a car bomb to a government building and blew it up and killed hundreds of fellow Americans. The KKK is the most deadly terrorist group in American history. They killed thousands upon thousands of African Americans. Okay? And even the DC snipers in the early 2000s just randomly started shooting people throughout Washington, D.C. area. So we basically have seen terrorists, in all different kinds of races and all different kinds of countries. It has been a way of achieving a political goal. And in the French Revolution, it was kind of the first time it was actually used. The French Revolution, they used terror to get people to conform to what the French revolutionaries wanted them to conform to. Okay, so we are going to stop there for today. Feel free to watch as many times as you'd like.